Welcome to another kit bash from my Death Corps of Krieg army. In this video, we'll be revisiting the Death Corps of Krieg Geist, so if you haven't seen the introductory video for this particular company within Krieg, I suggest you watch that first, linked here. I won't be repeating the background lore introduced in that first video. Also, as promised, in this video I will also be including a breakdown of the Krieg color scheme I am using across the entire army, and the core paints and techniques involved in bringing this army to life. As you may recall in the first Krieg Geist video, the story prominently featured an Imperial Psyker, responsible for raising the dead and thus ensuring an eternity of conflict and destruction for those blessed by the Psyker's lightning arc of resurrection. So, we are going to jump straight into the story of the Resurrector, a very special Psyker with a very special role on the Krieg battlefield. The battlefield stretched endlessly before him, a horizon of death where Krieg's sacrifice lay heaped in silent mounds. The Psyker, known only as the Resurrector, moved slowly, mounted upon a throne-like perch atop his rumbling transport. Around him, the air crackled with unnatural energy, an aura of bitter resentment and raw power that bent the atmosphere in waves of psychic disturbance. His pale, almost translucent skin glistened faintly in the dim, smoke-filled light, tinged blue, as if the cold of death had claimed him too. Flowing blue-black robes tangled with hues of warm khaki concrete and swirled around him like storm clouds, their colors blending seamlessly with the grim regalia of Krieg's armies. The Resurrector's staff, carved with the sigils of the Imperial Psyker, emitted a psychic current that arced from the central eye of the staff, forming a jagged bolt that reached toward a crumpled Death Rider horse amidst the carpet of Krieg corpses. As the staff's energy lanced downward, the ground trembled, and spectral wails erupted from the very air. The beast began to convulse, its sinuous limbs twitching as it began to shift. Its bones groaned unnaturally, knitting together with fragments of tattered flesh that clung stubbornly to its warped frame. The creature's once proud form had been reduced to a grotesque effigy of war, a mockery of its former strength, but one more weapon for the Resurrector to command. Beside him, the Ogren bodyguard he had resurrected earlier heaved the corpse of the horse upward, dragging it forward with exaggerated and grotesque strength. The Ogren had once been a towering figure of loyalty and brutality, and now its existence was a horror of sinewy arms and exposed ribs, dragging itself on clawed hands. A Krieg helmet, absurdly deformed for its mutated skull, sat on its head, its spike piercing the fog around it. The tattered remnants of its equipment flapped as it moved, and it let loose a guttural growl as it obeyed its master's unspoken will. The Resurrector's lips twisted into a bitter snarl as he surveyed the scene. The loss of his arms, burned away in an uncontrolled psychic outburst years earlier, had taught him the futility of restraint. He had once sought to wield the warp with precision, an idealistic soul who dreamed of harnessing its power to protect the Imperium. But now, encased in prosthetic, mechanical limbs that whirred and clicked as he gripped his staff, he harbored only resentment. The cost of his failure had been eternal agony, and he now unleashed that pain upon the battlefield, channeling it into the grotesque work of resurrecting Krieg's fallen to fight an unending war. The psychic storm intensified as ghost-like entities began to spiral outward from the Resurrector's throne. These spectral wraiths barely formed masses of screaming malice, seemed to pour from the command car itself. They twisted and writhed as they flowed outward, their translucent forms blending with the battlefield's smoke. Some hovered near the Psyker, forming a flickering veil around him, while others dove toward the battlefield to envelop enemy soldiers in cold, suffocating fear. These ghosts were not the Krieg soldiers the Resurrector reinstated. They were manifestations of the warp itself, vicious byproducts of his psychic power. And trailing the Resurrector's vehicle was a second vehicle, of a similar kind. This one housing a squad of grenadiers, their grim faces obscured behind their signature rebreathers. Their task was to protect the Psyker at all costs, a duty they accepted without hesitation, even as the ghosts swirling around him made the air heavy with dread. In the minds of the grenadiers, the Resurrector was both a weapon and a curse, a necessary evil they tolerated in their eternal service to Krieg's unrelenting wars. The eerie light of the Psyker's energy reflected off their khaki uniforms and reinforced helmets as they gripped their las guns, scanning the chaos for threats to their grim charge. The Resurrector was no hero, no saint, but a creature of the Imperium's darkest necessity, a bitter soul commanding an army of the damned. As the battle raged, the Psyker's laughter echoed across the battlefield, a sound as cold and lifeless as the legion he had raised. For him, there was no glory, only the endless march of death, and his place at its helm. As promised, I'd like to dive into the paint scheme that I've been developing for my Death Korps of Krieg army, and explain a bit of how it's designed to reflect the eternal war that they're fighting amidst the smoke-filled skies and rubble-strewn ruins of a shattered city that lay under their siege. Each color choice serves to reinforce this bleak narrative of the battlefield in which they fight. This deep, smoky black is one of the primary colors I've chosen and a cornerstone for the army's aesthetic. It evokes the suffocating darkness of battlefields that are choked with ash and smoke, and the blue hue adds some depth and coldness, a kind of haunting tone, reminding viewers of the grim skies that loom perpetually over the Death Korps' doomed campaigns. As you can see, this is applied to both the infantry and the vehicles. Black is prominently featured on Krieg soldiers, across their uniforms, particularly covering the armored parts of the uniform, from helmets to armored shoulder pads to the breastplates of grenadiers, that creates a stark and imposing presence. And for vehicles of all sorts, this midnight black is applied to the upper half of the unit or the vehicle, masking vulnerable areas such as mounted weapons, hatches, and viewing ports, as if shrouding these elements in shadows to symbolize their peril and also camouflage their details. The second primary color that I've chosen is a kind of warm khaki gray color called concrete that represents the rubble and urban devastation through which the Krieg forces march tirelessly. Inspired by the endless siege of a city turned to dust and ruin, this color contrasts with the stark midnight black to ground the models in the realism of urban warfare. And again, it is consistently applied across the soldiers and vehicles. For the soldiers, it is the color of the Krieg iconic trench coat, tying the soldiers visually to the broken environment they inhabit. And to vehicles, this color is applied to the bottom half of each vehicle, blending seamlessly with the ground and rubble beneath them, making them appear as if they're emerging directly from the desolation, and to some degree visually creating confusion of where the rubble ends and the vehicle begins. The primary highlight color I have chosen is a white gray, and this serves as the Army's boldest visual accent, symbolizing the fleeting light of humanity amidst the endless dark. An aged, slightly muted tone of white is used to prevent harsh contrast while still drawing the eye to key details and breaking up the muted palette. In the infantry, you'll see that the white is used to apply to face masks, to leg wraps, and as the primary color of insignias, numbers, and other markings, giving the Krieg soldiers a stark and otherworldly visage. On vehicles, these feature a distinctive organic white line that curves around the middle of the vehicle, separating the midnight black upper sections from the khaki warm concrete lower sections. This line forms a wave motif that evokes the relentless advance of the Krieg forces, their line pushing forward like an unstoppable tide, wave after wave. I have also selected a number of supporting colors. The most frequent and common ones that you will likely see in my Death Korps of Krieg army help add depth to the overall army and variety while remaining grounded in the army's grim narrative. So I use mahogany for all the leather elements such as belts, straps, and boots, and it provides a rich and natural contrast to the colder tones. I use steel to all of the metallic details like weapons, buckles, and rivets, reinforced with weathering effects to capture the worn utilitarian nature of Krieg equipment. I use an amber gloss color for eyes, goggles, and lenses, and this warm orange hue adds a haunting, glowing focal point, suggesting a kind of lifeless mechanical precision in the Krieg. And then finally, I use a blended yellow-orange, specifically for energy-based weapons, flames, and lightning that are painted with a blend of vibrant yellow and orange, even into some reds and deeper rust colors, creating vivid bursts of light that contrast sharply with the muted tones of the rest of the models. Finally, for weathering, and to unify the army and ground it in the gritty realism of endless war, I've used quite a bit of weathering here. It's applied very generously across all models, and you'll see an evolution of how I'm experimenting with it to try to get the best effects. For the rust effects, I've used dirty down rust to really bring to life the metal elements and creating that appearance of aged and battle-worn equipment. I've used streaking grime pretty much over most surfaces and then removing much of it and leaving it in the recesses to capture the filth and wear of unrelenting kind of siege warfare. I've also used a couple of different oil washes. Specifically, on the midnight black parts of vehicles, I've used a sand-colored pin wash as a contrast, and on the concrete warm parts of the underparts of the vehicles, I've used an oil black. These also give some depth and reinforce the sense of heavy utilitarian design. So this color palette and the colors within it combine to tell a story of an army that has fought, died, and risen again, ceaselessly waging war amidst the ashes of civilization. Every model is a reflection of Krieg's ethos, relentless duty, grim resilience, and the inevitability of sacrifice. You'll notice that there's very little applied to any specific model that make it stand out, which I also think is in line with the ethos of Krieg, the nameless, faceless soldiers that form a sea of attack endlessly and endlessly over and over again, wave after wave. One particular painting technique I wanted to highlight that I've used quite consistently across this army is the stippling technique. And that involves applying paint to a surface using a brush with a dabbing or a tapping motion rather than smooth strokes. And this creates a textured effect, often used to mimic weathering, rust, or organic textures like fur or skin, but also modeled surfaces on steel and other kinds of materials work very well. By varying the pressure and the paint consistency and even the brush type, often with a stiff or older brush, painters can achieve subtle gradients, patterns, or speckled effects that add depth and realism to their miniatures. The stippling technique in miniature painting is actually inspired by the principles of pointillism. though adapted for a very different medium and purpose. Pointillism was a painting style pioneered by artists like George Seurat, involving the use of small, distinct dots of color to create an image, relying on the viewer's eye to blend the colors together. Similarly, stippling in miniature painting often uses this kind of small dab or dot to build up these textures or layers or gradients, as I mentioned. But the focus in miniature painting of this technique is typically on creating more naturalistic effects like weathering, skin tones, or organic surfaces, rather than using it to create a complete image. For a great quick overview of how stippling works on miniatures, check out Zumikito Miniatures' video on this topic. I've put the link in it in the description below, and it's a great explanation and application of the technique. With regard to basing, I've continued the custom base approach that I used in the first Krieg Geist video. So the custom base for the Psyker is composed entirely of a sea of Krieg corpses, so dense that it obscures the ground beneath it. It's basically a kind of macabre mass grave that the Psyker strides across, drawing upon the souls of his fallen comrades to fuel his grotesque necromantic abilities. So how I had accomplished this was I actually bought 2 packs of the Station Forge Grimguard units called the Fallen, and then selected the size base I wanted to use for the Psyker and his Ogren bodyguard, and glued down an arrangement of the fallen soldiers, packed as densely as possible. And then I heated up some blue stuff and I spread it all over this built-up base and let it cool. And then this became a mold that I could use to then fill with epoxy sculpt in this case. I left that overnight, and afterward I had the perfect size base for the kitbash. I also used that same mold to create smaller circular bases for the haunting spirit hosts that accompany the Psyker's entourage. And then the bases got a mix of paint, including the Krieg uniform colors, representing the bodies that are strewn across the battlefield, also some dark, dried blood mixed with muddy earth and streaking grime to set the scene for the models and make sure nothing in the base really popped out that starkly to draw attention away from the figures and models themselves. So for those kit bashers out there that are interested in knowing more about the base models I used to kit bash the Psyker and his entourage, here are the models that I used. So specifically 3 kits I sourced from the Age of Sigmar Nighthaunt faction. The first of these kits was Kurdos Valencian, the Craven King. He was the base model for the Resurrector. And in the Nighthaunt lore, this character is a tragic and malevolent figure within Nighthaunt legions. Once a mortal noble, Kurdos was a scheming and ambitious man who lusted after power and wealth, betraying and murdering his rivals to ascend to the throne. Yet at the height of his treachery, Nagash, the great necromancer, saw his selfish ambition and denied him his ill-gotten crown. Upon his death, Kurdos was cursed to serve Nagash in eternal undeath, never allowed to wield power or authority of his own again. As the Craven King, he is an empty monarch, carried aloft on a blackened throne by ghostly retainers, his spectral form exuding resentment and bitterness. I thought this was the perfect fit, not only visually and aesthetically, but even from a lore perspective for my Resurrector Psyker. The second kit I used for the ghosts that accompany the Resurrector were taken directly as is from the Spirit Host kit. So in the Nighthaunt lore, these are terrifying spectral entities bound to the service of Nagash, the great necromancer, and form one of the most haunting units in the Nighthaunt legions. Each spirit host is composed of the tormented souls of those who committed heinous deeds in life, betrayers, murderers, or cowards who abandoned their comrades to die. Condemned for eternity, these swirling masses of anguished wraiths appear as ethereal, semi-corporeal figures bound together in a cacophony of wailing despair. Spirit hosts descend upon their victims in a flurry of ghostly blades, overwhelming foes with relentless attacks while radiating an aura of chilling dread. Their very existence is a punishment, forever trapped between life and death, and they serve as a stark reminder of Nagash's unyielding dominion over the souls of the unworthy. Again, I thought a perfect complement to the Resurrector. For the bodyguard Ogren that accompanies the Resurrector, I've taken this from the Mourngul Age of Sigmar kit. It was born from despair and cannibalistic hunger. Mournguls were once mortal warriors or noble figures who fell to madness and depravity, often during times of great famine or war. Consumed by insatiable hunger, they turned to devouring their kin and were cursed upon death to forever haunt the mortal realms as grotesque undead abominations. They stalk the darkness of shattered battlefields, their forms shrouded in eerie mists. Mournguls are bound to the service of Nagash and serve as his relentless predators, hunting mortals wherever they stray. Their grotesque hollowed forms and their endless hunger make them nightmarish embodiments of death and despair. The final kit I used for this kitbashed was a pair of Centaur light assault carriers. And one of them is an armored light assault carrier, and the other has an open top. And in the 40k lore, the light assault carrier is a compact, rugged vehicle designed to transport grenadiers swiftly across the battlefield while providing fire support in the direst conditions. Built for the relentless trench warfare that defines Krieg's campaigns, the Centaur's low profile and reinforced armor allow it to navigate hazardous terrain, including shell-cratered wastelands and rubble-strewn cityscapes. Its crew operates with the stoic precision characteristic of Krieg, advancing into the thick of battle without hesitation, often under withering enemy fire. I hope you enjoyed this sequel to the Krieg Geist company within my Death Korps of Krieg army. Pictured as the full Krieg Geist company that has been built and painted so far, but there are so many more ideas for kit bashes and additions to this army that I have planned. On this channel, I hope to publish additional sequels to many of the introductory army kit bashes I have shown so far, as well as continue to introduce completely new armies. So whether you are interested in me going deeper within a particular army, or if you're excited to see whole new army concepts, I'd really appreciate your feedback either in the comments below or on the White Flag Patreon linked in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching.